All right, let's go to Revelation 5. Speaking of Jesus, Revelation 5 is very much about Jesus. And we dipped our toe into the pool last week, but we're going to move on further into the chapter. I'm actually going to go circle back, though, because I was doing some studying this week. I found another thought process about what we looked at last week that I thought had some merit at least, and I wanted to share it with you just so you can think about it also. But let's review before we read this chapter. And just about every week we're going to review because I think that helps us just know the book. I want to know the book, when we're done. So remember, chapter 1's introductory. We find out who's writing it, which is John, whichever John that is. I happen to believe it's the apostle. But he's on the island of Patmos being persecuted for his service to Christ. And then he hears a voice behind him telling him to write things down for these 7 churches. He turns around, sees this person that is overwhelming. He falls over like he's dead. Fortunately, he tells us later what he saw in that brief moment. And then the person who was speaking to him told him to write down. And so look at chapter 1, verse 19. Because this is a significant kind of guide for how the book unfolds. Write therefore what you have seen, which is chapter 1, what is now, which seems to be the letters, chapters 2 and 3, and what will take place later. Once we get to chapter 4, he brings that phrase up again. I want to show you what must take place after this or later. So that seems to be the breakdown of the vision. Anywho, 7 golden lampstands. Jesus, we know it's Jesus because of verse 18. He is standing among 7 golden lampstands, which represent the churches, those specific 7 churches. He has 7 stars in his hand, which represent the angels or messengers of those 7 churches. And then he tells him, write down these letters for all these 7 churches. So Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. I passed out that map, and remember, it was like a mail route. It was like almost a horseshoe pattern. Yeah, for our 2 male people. So, if Patmos was down here, this little island, this is the peninsula kind of thing that's our present-day Turkey. If the letter is going to make its way to the continent, he's got 7 cities, and it's going to make its route. This one letter is going to be shared among these 7 cities. So he writes to these 7 churches, and again, just to help us remember all this stuff, how many churches got all positive review from Jesus? 2. How many got all negative review from Jesus? 2. And then mixed review, the 3 that are left. So 2, and then 3 got the mixed. Remember, he wasn't always upset about the same thing in the churches. Sometimes it was doctrine. Sometimes it was behavior, like you're acting like the pagans. Sometimes it was just you didn't love each other enough. So that's why you have to study each letter and see what's on Jesus' heart. What does he value? What does he hate? Those letters are very powerful. And remember, at the end of each letter, he would make a promise, or more than one promise, to those who conquer, those who overcome, those who are victorious. Oh, it's just worth doing a study on those. Brilliant. And what we're going to see as the vision unfolds after this is that you actually have pictures of some of those promises coming true. It's pretty awesome. Now in chapter 4, he's called up because he sees this door or gate open in heaven, and then the voice that called him in chapter 1, Jesus' voice says, come up here and I'll show you what must take place after this. So this is the 3rd stage of the vision. And that's where we looked at chapter 4, where he sees the throne, the one on the throne, who's got this reddish hue about him, this circular emerald thing that was kind of like a rainbow, and that it was there, but not kind of there. It's like misty. And then he sees these creatures. There's 24 of one kind and 4 of another. The 24 he calls elders, right? And they all have a throne. Each of them have a throne around the main throne of God. And then they seem human, and they've got white clothing and a golden wreath crown, like a victor's crown on their heads. And then, so they're the bigger circle. What's within their circle close to the throne? What are these 4 beings? He doesn't give them a name, but he does describe them. What are some of the descriptions of these 4 beings?
Lion.
Right, so each of them has a different kind of face, right? So one of them's a lion, ox, eagle, human. Which seem to, they kind of be categories of earthly creatures, right? Wild animals, domesticated animals, flying creatures, and humans. What else about these 4?
They have eyes.
Oh, yeah. They have eyes everywhere. Everywhere, all over them. What else do we know about them?
6 wings.
6 wings. Yeah, 6 wings. Not 4 like in Ezekiel's vision, 6 wings. And what are they doing with those wings? Does it say in this one, or am I thinking of... No, it doesn't. I was thinking of Isaiah, sorry. And then, look at verse 8 again, chapter 4, verse 8. What is their worship chant that they call back and forth to each other?
Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty,
Who was, and is to come. Oh, that's so good. I get chills every time I hear that. And do you notice it has a cadence? That's true in just about any language. It's not just poeticized in English. That cadence is purposeful. And, so great. And remember, that's an echo of Isaiah, his vision, except the ending changed. In Isaiah, when the seraphim creatures called out this worship, it was holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And this vision, these creatures, which seem like a mix of cherubim, seraphim, they have the same beginning, but the end is who was and is to come. So as they worship, the 24 elders respond with their own worship, which is how chapter 4 ends. They fall down before the one on the throne, not the creatures, but the one on the throne. They put their crowns down before Him and they worship Him as the Creator. Now we get into chapter 5. Let's read it and then dive in. Is someone willing to read part or all of chapter 5? Did you say, Sue? You'll read it? Okay. If you would read that 14 verses for us.
Then I saw in the right hand of Him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." Then I saw a lamb looking at it as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of Him who sat on the throne. And when He had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. And then they sang a new song, saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth." Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them saying, "To Him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen," and the elders fell down and worshipped.
Ooh, the worship's getting ramped up in chapter 5. Okay.
Wow.
So in chapter 5, we see this really dramatic scene. Because remember in chapter 4, when John is called up there, he's in the prophetic tradition. of having these divine visions of God on the throne with these beings around him. And every time that happens in the prophetic tradition of the Old Testament, there's some decree of God that needs to be made known on the earth. And so John must expect that he's about to receive some kind of decree or message to take to people on earth. That would be logical for him to do, because he knows the Old Testament. So when he gets to the part, he didn't be like, now, number 5. So when he gets to the part we call chapter 5, he sees the scroll in the hand of the one on the throne, or it could be read at his right side. Maybe it's sitting on the throne. That doesn't really matter. But a decision's been reached. So there's something on this scroll. We talked about it last week. Writing on both sides, right? It's sealed with how many seals?
7.
Which is unusual. It wasn't unheard of, but that means this is a special document. All 7, the way seals usually work, that would mean all 7 need to be broken before the scroll could be read. It would be kind of weird in the ancient mind to think of a scroll with sections sealed off. It would be the whole scroll, right, that's sealed off. So, what I presented to you last time, which I'm still persuaded is probably right, but what I presented last time is this would probably be the decree of God about what he's going to do about the injustices on earth, because his people are suffering. To me, that fits into the narrative of Revelation better than anything else. But I was watching a video of a man, and he's a Seventh-day Adventist. Is anybody not familiar with what they're about? Well, the Seventh-day Adventists are I would call them a sect of Christianity. So what they believe, Seventh Day, the reason they're called Seventh Day, they believe that the Sabbath is still supposed to be on the 7th day, on Saturday. One of the hallmarks of Seventh-day Adventists is that they still believe that Christians are meant to live by the old law. A lot of the old law. Obviously not the sacrificial stuff of the temple, but that we're bound to the old covenant commands of God still, including not worshiping on worshiping on the Sabbath on Saturday. They would actually say, and I talked to some people from this church when I was in college and had Bible studies with them, and they make a pretty compelling case. If you don't know your Bible, they would have won me over if I was coming to this fresh. But what they believe is that we are a part of the apostasy because we worship on Sunday. That we followed the Roman pagan lies that Satan brought into the church to get us off of the track of God's law and make up our own thing. That's what they teach. By the way, I looked into that because when they brought it to me when I'm in college, I'm like, whoa, if they're right, I don't want to be an apostate. So I'm looking at the verses they gave me. I'm looking at other things that I know of in the scriptures. It didn't hold water when I was looking into this. I've looked at it since then too, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. It doesn't hold water. Anyways, that will color what I'm about to tell you, but it doesn't mean it negates what I'm about to tell you. It just know that that's in the background. The law is very important to them. So here's what he brought out, and I won't go fully into what he said because it would take too long. But basically, let me refer to my notes just so I give you the right passages to look up later. I'm going to give you the quick version, but I want to make sure you have passages to refer to. So, where is it? Okay, I'm going to give you a line of logic to follow with these verses so that you can follow up. In Deuteronomy 17, verses 18 to 20, Moses is giving the people his last teaching because he's about to die on top of the mountain and they're about to go into the promised land. So this is his farewell address, okay? And he's giving them a lot. It's a long speech. And I don't know if it was all one long speech or if it came in parts, but it's a lot to take in. One of the things he said is when you go on in there, you're going to ask for a king, which they later did. And when you ask for a king, this is how it needs to go. And so he gives them instructions about what the king ought to do. Now, one of the things the king was supposed to do in these verses, it says, When the king takes the throne of his kingdom, he's to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, the law of God, taken from that of the Levitical priests. So he's going to take what the priests have, use that as his, original, so to speak, and then he's going to handwrite his own copy of the law. Now, it says he's supposed to have that with him, and he's supposed to read it all the days of his life, so that he won't stray from it to the right or the left. So the king of Israel was supposed to know the law so well that he would reign the way God would. That was the goal. So he was supposed to handwrite and have his own scroll of the law, right? And then you go to 1 Samuel 10:25. This is when the kingship is being asked for. What Moses predicted so long before, generations before, the people are doing. They want a human king. Having God as an invisible king with these judges popping up every once in a while and priests and stuff, just give us a human king. Let's simplify this. So, when Saul was chosen to be king, it says that Samuel wrote down the rights and duties of kingship and deposited that scroll before Yahweh. It doesn't say Saul did that. Remember, the one who becomes king is supposed to write his own copy. Isn't that what Moses said? Mm-hmm. Saul didn't do that. Samuel wrote down what the king's supposed to do, and he put it in the presence of the Lord. So already things aren't going the way Moses said. And then in 2 Kings 11:12, this is all headed somewhere, I promise. 2 Kings 11:12 is a really important picture because Jehoiada is a priest. And he's leading God's people as a priest at a time when a really wicked, she was a queen mother at first. She has taken control of the kingdom because the king died, and now she's trying to take advantage of his death to be in power. Now the king who died has a very young son, young children. And so this woman slaughters all the kids of the king so that no one can take the throne because she wants it. Well, there's a villainess in the story, but there's a heroine too, because one of the nursemaids for the children spared Joash, and he's like a year old or less because he's still nursing. She spirits him away, hides him away, keeps him safe with people who are on the side of good. And then when he's 7 years later, this priest, Jehoiada, who is in the loop of all this, he brings him out. He gets a bunch of the guardsmen to protect this child as they coronate him, crown him king. So there are three things that happened when they crown him king. Number one, the priest puts a crown on his head. Number two, the priest presents him with a copy of the covenant. Interesting. And then three, they anoint him. When all those three things are done, then the people clap their hands and they rejoice and they say, "Long live the king." It almost sounds medieval. That's like the movies I see. Long live the king. Well, that's what they did in ancient Israel. So three things happened for this coronation: the crown, the scroll of the law, and then the anointing of the king. So anyways, this man's putting all these things together. And then he points out that after the kingship of David comes to a halt, when Babylon takes Judah out into exile, the Jews began to long for a king to come in David's line, which we talked about, right? The root of David. They're waiting for David's descendant to come, their Messiah, not just to get rid of their enemies, but because this is Jewish rabbis teaching, not in the Bible. They began to believe that what some of the prophets said about the law or the scroll being sealed up, they began to think that the Jewish people as a whole couldn't have full access to the meaning of the law because the king wasn't there, who was supposed to keep the law so close to him. So what they were anticipating was that when Messiah comes as David's heir, we can finally have the fullness of the law revealed to us again. Now, I had heard this before, and I actually heard that you can't say every person of any group does anything, but generally it was understood that Elijah was supposed to come first, right? That is biblical. Elijah's going to come ahead of the Messiah. And a lot of the Jewish teachers began to say, when Messiah comes, he's going to know the law so completely, so well, that he's going to want to teach the Jewish people this law. But he's going to be so supremely knowledgeable about the law, he's going to be over our heads. So he's going to speak it, but Elijah's going to be there to break it down for us. Elijah's going to be the go-between so that we can actually grasp Messiah, because Messiah is going to be like way up here with it all. So that kind of syncs with what I had learned before, what this guy was saying. And he did his doctrinal dissertation on this, so I was like, okay, you did your research. So here's how he lands the plane. How he views this, and how Ellen White, who started the Seventh-day Adventists, she called herself a prophetess. The way she viewed it also is that Revelation 5 is Jesus' coronation ceremony, and his taking of the scroll was in line with this Old Testament picture that the king was supposed to have a copy of the law, because then he can bring it to the people of Israel. And I'm listening to this going, now that's a different take on Revelation 5 than I've heard before. Interesting. And it does have roots in the way the Jewish kings would go. My main problem with that is that Jesus already had a chance in his mortal ministry to declare his understanding of the law. And he said, I came not to abolish the law of the prophets, but to fulfill it. And we shouldn't think that all he meant was, I'm going to keep the prophecies. I'm going to fulfill the prophecies. What he meant was, I'm here to show you its fullness, both in how I act and what I say. So it doesn't quite fit for me what this guy was saying. But I thought, but there is maybe there's something going on here. But I definitely do believe this is a coronation scene. Bill Granville, after we were done, gave me a call about something else, but he had a question. And I wanted to address this with you. I don't know if you maybe had this question also. When we looked at this last week, did you notice in verses 3 and 4, after the mighty angel says, who's worthy to open the scroll and break its seals, there is, for a time period, there is no one found. You notice that, right? Mm-hmm. And Bill's question was, well, where was Jesus? How can it be said that there's no one found worthy? That includes Jesus. Like, nowhere in creation is anyone found. And so it's not like after a second Jesus is announced as the worthy one. There's this time frame where nobody can be found anywhere. And that's why John's weeping, and he's weeping, and eventually, we don't know how long it takes, eventually the elder comes up and says, no, don't cry. Look. Doesn't he say, look? Yeah. Like now, not before, but now there's this lamb in the middle of the gathering, of the heavenly gathering. And it was a good question. I wrestled with that question too. I didn't mention anything about it last week, but I was glad he asked it because I wanted to throw an idea out to you. Not dogma, not doctrine, but just a thought. What is it that the elder in verse 5 said about Jesus? He calls him the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He calls him the Root of David. But what did he say that Jesus had done? Triumph, right? Yeah. So here's a thought. Is it possible that time of silence of no one being found worthy in heaven, on earth, or under the earth actually did include Jesus in this sense? Jesus wasn't yet worthy to take the scroll and break its seals until he had triumphed. That even Jesus, as the mortal Son of God on earth, wasn't yet fit. And that's what let's use the word fit, because we've looked at the word worthy before. And hearing the word worthy, we sometimes misunderstand what it means. Worthy just means fit, proper. Jesus wasn't properly qualified to take the scroll yet because he hadn't yet triumphed in the way he was meant to. Now that may sound borderline blasphemous because that implies that something was lacking in Jesus at a certain stage of his life or existence. But I want to show you Hebrews chapter 2 because this, I think, ties into the idea I'm trying to express. Would you say that Jesus has always been perfect?
Yes. I
Okay. Now, I would say so too, depending on what we mean by perfect. Because the word perfect means complete, full, mature. If you're thinking of moral perfection, yes. I mean, there was never a time where Jesus was making sinful choices, rebellious choices. But that's because when we hear perfect, we are filling in blanks there, correct? We're filling in morally perfect. And that will get you in trouble when you get to Hebrews 2. That'll throw you off. So let's read what I'm talking about, and then you'll see what I mean, I think. What is it I wanted to tell you? Oh, yeah. So let's go to Hebrews chapter 2, and let's look starting at verse 9. This is a beautiful text, no matter what you're studying. Just Hebrews chapter 2 shows so much about Jesus. I love it. But it does fit into what we're talking about here. Make sure everybody's there. Okay. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death. Did you notice he didn't say he's crowned with glory and honor because he's God's son? Right? Just by virtue of who he is, you'd think he should be crowned with glory and honor. But the writer of Hebrews points out something interesting. He's crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death. There's something about what Jesus accomplished in the cross and resurrection that makes him even more worthy of glory and honor than he would have been otherwise. He suffered death so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. If you're thinking morally perfect, you're like, what? Was Jesus not perfect before he suffered? I don't get this. And I wrestled with this because perfect to me meant something. It meant you've never made a mistake. You've always been doing what you're supposed to do. So, let's replace the word perfect here with the word complete. Okay? Jesus wasn't complete in what sense until he suffered?
Fulfilling his Father's demand for him.
Yes. If you think about it, if I were to take a math test with 100 questions, which I've done before, and it is any student's nightmare. Oh, gag, to 100. And it's especially if it's like the multiplication drills. 10 rows, 10 columns. It's this massive headache. And it's timed. Anyways, sorry, flashback. So if I had 100 math questions to answer, I answered 98 of them exactly right. Was I perfect in my work?
No.
Yes and no. I was perfect in my work. The work I did was perfect. But I wasn't perfect because I didn't fulfill or complete the assignment. Do you see it? We're talking about perfect like 98 were done correctly. He's talking about there needs to be 100. So Jesus wasn't fully worthy to play the role God called him to play. And if you keep reading, you find out the role is high priest. Jesus wasn't perfect for the role of high priest before he suffered. He was perfect in and of himself, but he wasn't perfectly suited to the role God had for him until he suffered. Now that he suffered, he can be our sympathetic high priest. Right? You see that? So, Jesus could be, let's just pretend that Dave has been morally perfect his whole life, but I need a veterinarian. I need a veterinarian. And I'm like, I know the perfect guy. Dave's the perfect guy. He's never made any mistakes. Oh, so he can help me with my animal? Well, he knows nothing about animals, but he's the perfect guy. That's a problem, isn't it? Because when I say I know the perfect guy, you're thinking the perfect guy for the need, not someone who's never made mistakes. That's what we're dealing with. God needed Jesus to be perfect for his role, and he wasn't until he suffered, and then he was. So that's what I'm talking about when I say in Revelation chapter 5, to me it makes sense that Jesus wasn't worthy, so to speak, for this role of taking the scroll until some things were accomplished. Once he triumphed over all those things by the cross and the resurrection, now he is fit to take the scroll and to start popping off the seals. And I think, I'm not saying this is absolutely the reason that this played out the way it did here, but I think that moment of silence may be indicating that there was a time period when actually there was no one, including Messiah. And then something happened on earth that suddenly made someone worthy enough. Something transpired on a cross on a hill called Golgotha and in a tomb borrowed from a man named Joseph, that suddenly you can stop crying now, John. There is someone now. And look at, he's here, right? Oh, the drama. If there's anything to what I'm saying, the drama of that just got kicked up by like 10 notches for me. Like, honest to goodness. Because remember, John didn't say there was no one non-divine. He says there's no one in heaven, earth, or under the earth. There's absolutely nobody. And then all of a sudden there is. Like, how did that work? I think it's because something happened.
Well, wouldn't he already died on the cross when this is taking place? Because Jesus told him what to write in the letters, and then, so wouldn't he already rose from the dead?
Thank you for saying that. So, this is what I was talking about before, last week, when I mentioned that the voice says, I'll show you what must take place after this. Again, we have to be saying, am I hearing those words the way he meant them? Because he either means, after this in chronological earth time, in other words, John's on the island of Patmos writing, and he's like, now from here forward in earth story, I'm going to show you the future. Or did he mean, what must take place after this in this vision? If he's talking about the vision itself, anything's on the table, because I don't know what the vision's going to be about yet, you know? And so I personally, the way I read this, and it's the only way this vision makes any sense to me, to be honest with you. I mean, the whole Revelation. What we're going to be seeing as we go through, and I'll try to point it out when we get there and not like try to force it on you, but I'll just kind of point it out. Oh, look, out your left window, you'll see. There are repetitions in the vision that won't make sense to you if you read it as one long story. It will be completely baffling to you how this is possible. For instance, how many times can all the stars in the sky fall? Did God throw them back up there so that he can have them fall again later? How many times can all the islands vanish because there's nowhere for them to go? Why does John see that happen multiple times? We'll kind of flesh this out as we go, but as I've come to understand it, the only way this vision makes any sense in its entirety is if John's actually seeing a story unfold multiple times. But he's seeing different details about the story each time. There was a movie called Vantage Point. Did anybody see that movie? This is old. This is like 15, 20 years ago. It was a very rare and unique kind of movie, and I think that's one reason why a lot of people may not have liked it. Because basically, it was one story told, and I can't remember how many, but let's just say it was one story told 5 times from different vantage points. So each time you're in a different person's shoes while the same event is going on. But you're watching it from what they're doing. So one guy, I don't remember it well enough, but one guy's like a security forces guy, one person's a pedestrian, like, you know what I mean? And so same storyline, but now you're rewinding and going into his view. But at the end, you see how it ends for everybody. I contend that's pretty much the book of Revelation. It's that style. But at the end, we're going to see how it ends for everybody. So anyways, something to keep in mind, that here in chapter 4, I believe we're seeing the creation emphasized. Because, again, why did they worship? Why were the 24 elders focused on God's worthiness? Because he's the creator. Why? Why are they fixated on his... And they don't say creator and then add something else onto it. They just stick to his being the creator. Chapter 4. And that goes along with why are the faces of these creatures, these earthly beasts? Why is that? I think chapter 4 focuses on God as creator. Chapter 5 introduces us to something profound that he decided to do in eternity past, which is to bring his son on board to do this mission. And I think chapter 5 is looking back to Jesus' accomplishment. Now, when John's writing it down, it's past tense. In the vision itself, the story is progressing forward. Starting at creation, we're moving forward now. We need someone who'd open the scroll. We can't find anybody because the universe has been tainted by sin, and we've got a bunch of unworthies. And now Jesus accomplished something on earth that makes him worthy, and now we see where the story goes next. That's not how everyone teaches it, and you are certainly free to disagree with that view, but I think as we go through, you might find it hard to hold the view that this is one long story. It's just, honest to goodness, I'm not trying to push that view on you. It's just I wasn't able to do it personally. Anyway, okay, where did we leave off? We were in verse 6. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I need to go back to verse 6. There we go. Okay. Chapter 5, verse 6. Sorry, we're chapter flipping. I sometimes forget that. So now we're back at chapter 5. Then I saw a lamb. Now the elder was who he was looking at a second ago. And the elder's the one who told him to look. So he does. He turns his face, he turns his eyes, and then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, or amidst the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. Let's take this one slow. Why do you think John sees this person who we already know is Jesus, correct? Like back in verse 5, there's no one else who's the Lion of the tribe of Judah and the Root of David who has triumphed. There's just no other candidates. Why do you suppose Jesus is seen by John as a lamb, a sheep? It has to point to something about a lamb in the biblical story. And lambs in the biblical story aren't the only things to be sacrificed, but honest to goodness, that's the only thing they're good for in and of themselves. If it's a sheep, okay, you can get wool from it, you can get meat from it, or whatever. But if it's a lamb, it's just a potential thing, right? It's going to become a useful sheep one day. The lamb, though, go back to Exodus when the firstborn was threatened by God's plague that was going to come. The only way for the firstborn to be spared by God's death angel, as we call him, was if they were to put the blood of a certain kind of animal. It was very specific. It was either a young goat or a young sheep. We call it a lamb either way. We call it kid and lamb, but their language is a little more flexible on that one. So it could be a young one of either of those two, and it had to be without defect, correct? It had to be the best of what you had, and no broken body parts, no funky things going on with it physically, and it had to be pure white. Take that blood and you put on the doorposts, and death passes by, and your firstborn is spared. Now, moving forward from there, lambs are also used in sacrifices, along with bulls, along with other animals, but lambs are used for certain kinds of sacrifice. So it is interesting that he didn't say he saw a goat. He didn't say he saw a bull. All of these are used for sacrifice. Lamb, sheep, specifically. Do you remember what John the Baptizer, the Elijah who was to come, what did he say of Jesus according to John's Gospel? And he says it twice. Look, the Lamb of God. And one of those times he adds on, who takes away the sin of the world. Now, John, who I believe is writing this revelation, is the very one who gave us that little nugget from the baptizer. The other gospel writers didn't. And I'm not saying John made up this detail about seeing a lamb, but I'm saying it fits really well that John saw it. Because he's the one that also heard from, or he's the one that noted from the baptizer that he called Jesus the Lamb. So Jesus being a sacrificial lamb has to be involved here because the elder just called him a lion, right? And if the focus was on the strength and triumph part, for him to turn around and say, and I saw a lion, that would make perfect sense. So he hears, the lion's here, that's a lamb, right? It's weird. But this is not just some cute little lamb that you keep, but beside you as you eat dinner. How does he describe this lamb? First of all, let's look at his location. On this scene, just to remind you, with a very poor visual representation, here's what we've got. We've got the one on the throne that is in the center of everything. He's not on the side or the periphery. He's the center of everything in this scene. And who else is in the scene here? So the throne. Okay, yeah. So then, first thing John saw was these 24 thrones with the elders on them. This won't be 24, but imagine with me. And then, this is what's interesting. In chapter 4, he says, amidst the throne and around it were these 4 living creatures. The same language he uses of the Lamb who was on or amidst the throne. Oh, interesting. So the 4 living creatures, I'm just going to say, are like this. The Lamb is amidst the throne or on the throne. Whether he's sitting on the throne or just near the throne, he's actually closer even still than the 4 living creatures, because they're surrounding him. Everyone so far in the scene, except that mighty angel who announced the question, who's worthy, everyone we've gotten used to being in this scene are surrounding him, just like they have been surrounding the one on the throne. So, I've read my whole life in the NIV, he was on the throne. I thought, oh, he was in the center of the throne, center of the throne, which could be the accurate translation. And I thought, well, where'd the one who was on the throne go? Did he just morph into a lamb? Like, what's going on here? But as I looked into the actual language, the Greek language, the center could work, but in the midst of is the same sense that it had for the 4 living creatures. Now, the way I'm picturing it, and you keep me honest here, the way I'm picturing it, the one on the throne had the Lamb right next to his throne. Not where the creatures are. There may be here, but he's right here at the right hand. And he's about to grab the scroll. So he may not be on the throne yet, but he is at the right hand of the Father. Does that ring a bell? And that's where the idea of his being coronated, I think this has some merit to it. Whether it goes the direction of him taking the law, I don't know about that. But the idea that Jesus, after his death, burial, and resurrection, his ascension to the Father 40 days later, that when he gets to his heavenly home again, he is crowned the Lord of heaven and earth. I think that does make sense. And that these beings would be there for the coronation, that John has a chance to witness it so that he can pass this vision along to the suffering Christians. So let me ask you this, so that we won't keep our heads in the proverbial clouds on this. Why is this vision of Jesus, the triumphant one, going to be understood by these beings as the crowned king with God of all things? Why would that encourage suffering Christians in the first century or in 2019?
Because he did finally conquer.
Yes. And he is the Lamb, we're about to read it, who was slain. He was weak. He was vulnerable. He was trampled on by the wicked people of the earth, wasn't he? I mean, he was the innocent one who's being called a blasphemer. He's being called the worst of things. If God wants you, let him get you off the cross. Just so many misunderstandings about who he was. And that's exactly what all these suffering Christians are going through. They're seen as the ones turning their back on truth. They're the ones seen as turning their back on God. And they're totally misunderstood by the whole world. And Jesus, who in chapters 2 and 3 kept saying, but I see, I know. The one who knows the truth is the one who is in charge. That has got to be the most comforting thing they could have heard. Because the people in charge on earth, they don't see. They are completely reading it wrong. Like the people in Mexico. You're not getting drunk and being, debaucherous with everybody, so you're in the wrong. And the Christians are like, no, you are. You're totally wrong, guys. But they have no power to exert. These Christians, all they've got is land ownership. They can't exert any strength to prove how right they are. And I'm going to confess to you, I'm not a politically motivated speaker when I'm at church. And I don't think this is even a political thing. I must tell you how devastated I've been since yesterday when I heard about what New York decided about abortion. It made me physically ill. I've just been so laid low. And this picture is one of the few things that can comfort me. Because people in power are so wrong. They're so entirely off to think that these children could be disposed of that way. But the one who knows has the greater power. Like, how does that not give you a sense that I don't have to fight? I don't have to get out guns or bombs or switchblades to try to prove how right I am. The one who has all the power needed to make the point, he has the power and he knows what's true. And so I want to make sure we know these aren't just visions to be like, oh, Revelation's cool. It's so that in the moment you hear it, you're getting the sense of, okay. So these people who have power to kick me off my land and I can't do anything about it, they don't get the last word. These people that say it's fine to slaughter your baby up to the time it's about to be born, they don't get the last word. Like, there is someone with power who's right and who's good and who's just. Oh my goodness, it's inexpressible how important this point is. And I think that's one reason why Jesus said, come up here, I have to show you something. You need to see this, John, because I need my people to see it too. And you're the guy who's going to tell them. Right? Ooh, so good. Okay. Now, that's where he is. He's encircled by all of the heavenly beings we've met so far. Now, what does he look like? Okay, the lamb. Now, think about that. Lambs don't have horns, the little baby things. The lamb had 7 horns. What? Can you imagine if people were out hunting here in the woods of PA? They shot a buck. They took a picture. Guys, not 7 points. 7 antlers. Ding! Right? That's weird. 7 horns. And also, even weirder, 7 eyeballs. What is with that? Now, he tells us what the 7 eyes are. The 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. We've wrestled through this question before. We're going to have to keep wrestling through it because it's an interesting question. But let's start with the horns. What do horns represent?
Power.
Power. Yep. And not just like physical brute strength power. On an animal, that's what it represents. But all through the prophetic language of the Old Testament, the horn, which on an animal means brute strength power, it represents political, earthly power. So it's used of rulers, like in the book of Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah. It's used of rulers, even in Psalm 22. When earthly rulers or people with earthly power are envisioned as animals, they're envisioned with animals with horns because that's how agricultural people would connect that. So if Jesus has 7 horns, 7 symbols of authority, of power, what does 7 mean there?
7-fold Spirit.
It's connected to that, but why 7 horns? What does it tell us about his power and authority that there are 7 of them?
7 tribes.
Well, there were 7 churches, 12 tribes of Israel, yeah. What does 7 represent generally? Do you remember?
Complete.
So if you want to say perfection, just remember it's not the moral perfection. We're talking about fullness, completeness, right? So if we were to, I hate to do this because symbols are better than clear language sometimes, but if we were to translate the symbols into real clear language, what might we say about Jesus? That he has total authority, total, complete power. There's nothing missing in his authority. There's actually no one in the universe that can override Jesus. Is that not wonderful?
Yes.
Jesus says that his followers are going to be given eternal life and a home in his eternal kingdom. And then someone else steps up and says, no, I think that group should have it. And Jesus is like, dang, fine. No! Because who decided Jesus should have all the total authority?
God.
No one overrides Father, so no one overrides Jesus. Remember the story of Joseph. It's so profoundly good for this parallel. Pharaoh, who has total power in Egypt, said to the people of Egypt, Joseph is going to be Pharaoh to you now. He just isn't in charge of me. But everything else he's in charge of. That's exactly what 1 Corinthians 15 says about Jesus. He's not in charge of God the Father, but he's in charge of everything else. Because God the Father told him he is. And before Jesus left, he told his apostles, all authority. Total, if you want. Total authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So this is clearly a scriptural teaching. This isn't just, let's see what the symbols might mean. Now, we know what it means. The 7 horns means Jesus has absolute, total power. And I don't think we should miss this point, because this was written to people in Rome. What human being in the time of this period of the Roman Empire would be considered to have total power? Now, of course, that wasn't technically true, because they were assassinated left and right. Okay, so they clearly could be usurped or overthrown by somebody in the world. But in terms of political power, no one was greater than Caesar. Nobody. They knew of other peoples outside the Roman Empire, but they didn't matter, because he's Caesar, you know? So what does it mean to the early Christians who are being targeted by that man, Caesar, to find out that maybe he isn't the one who has total power after all? And this was what got the Christians in trouble from the very beginning. People like Peter and Paul would use this word Kyrios, Lord, to describe a crucified, risen Jesus. And that was the word in its fullest meaning for Caesar. He is the Kyrios, the Lord. You can say, my Lord, you know, if you have a master or if you have a boss, they're your Lord. But if you say the Lord, Chief Lord, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, which we'll see later in the vision, that includes Caesar himself being underneath you. Oh, I thought no one could override Caesar, but wait. Yeah, he can. Oh, this is so good. So, he has 7 horns. And what do you make of 7 eyeballs? Now, John actually gives us a heads up on what he's talking about, at least. Doesn't answer all our questions, but he does identify what the 7 eyes represent. What does he say about it? This is what Cecilia just mentioned.
7 spirits.
And this time he says that they're sent out into all the earth. Now, by the way, just as a connection to what we were talking about here, the teacher that was, and I wrote his name down, but did I? Where is it? In case you're wanting to go see that video for yourself, what I do with it? His name is... never mind, it's taking too much time. If you're interested, I'll tell you afterwards. What he said was, if you'll notice that in chapter 1 of Revelation, we read in chapter 1, verse 4. Oh, and I hear what you're saying, Dave. We're going to talk about that in just a second, because the translations will differ on what they say here. But even back in chapter 1, verse 4, there's that difference in translation. And my footnote will tell you the 2 options. Which translation do you have, Dave? NIV? Okay.
No, you have the New Living.
What does the New Living say right there for the 7 spirits?
In the footnotes, or
Either one, or both.
I'll just read 6.
Yeah.
Then I saw a lamb that looked as if it had been slaughtered, but it was now standing between the throne and the 4 living beings, and among the 24 elders. He had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which represent the 7-fold Spirit of
Okay.
God.
Yeah. Now the older NIV, before they updated it, had 7-fold in the main text. And then they had a little footnote, translator's note, that said, or 7 spirits. So in the new NIV, they just swapped them.
They did.
The main text is 7 spirits, and in the footnote it says, or 7-fold. And I'll be honest with you, I think they're just being honest. We can't know for sure. We just take what the rest of the Bible says and think, this makes the most sense to me. But we saw this, and we've looked at it enough, I don't think we need to delve too far into it, but we saw this before in an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Zechariah. We saw that there were 7 eyeballs on a stone. Back in Zechariah 3, verse 9, and 4, verse 10. Zechariah 3:9. Now, if a detail like that, which is a really weird detail, by the way, 7 eyeballs, if that's repeated, I would say that that's noteworthy, don't you? Don't you think? I don't think that's random. Especially because the book of Revelation is so infused with Old Testament prophecy. You have to take note of this. So we'll just read it, and we have talked about it before, so we won't dive fully into it again. But Zechariah has visions very similar to John's. They're cryptic and odd in their appearance, and you have to kind of work hard to figure out what it means. This is Zechariah 3, verse 9. In fact, let me go back to verse 8. I'll tell you why. Because this is a little wink-wink about Jesus. So I just want you to see that what we see in Revelation brings full circle back to what Zechariah saw. So verse 8, listen, high priest Joshua, and guess what the name Joshua is? Yeshua, which is also the name of Jesus. Oh. Okay, now I'm not saying he's talking to Jesus, our master. There was a high priest named Joshua back then in the Old Testament. I just think it's interesting. There's a high priest named Yeshua in this prophecy. You and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come. I wonder what things those might be. A high priest named Joshua with associates? He says, I'm going to bring my servant the branch. Now, in Isaiah's prophecy, that's a reference to Messiah, the branch of Jesse that grew up out of the stump. Now look at verse 9. See, the stone I have set in front of Joshua. There are 7 eyes on that one stone, and I will engrave an inscription on it, says Yahweh Almighty, and I will remove the sin of this land in a single day? Are you feeling that too? Who else could this be about but our Master Jesus, the high priest? And then look at verse 10 of chapter 4. So skip over the next chapter, because he brings up the stone thing again in chapter 4, verse 10. Who dares despise the day of small things, since the 7 eyes of Yahweh that range throughout the earth will rejoice when they see the chosen capstone in the hand of Zerubbabel? That has to do with rebuilding the temple and the walls. Did you see that the 7 eyes range throughout the earth? Mm-hmm. Just like in Revelation, they're the 7 spirits that are sent out into all the earth. Connection.
So it's kind of like all seeing, but...
Yes, exactly right. Just like the creatures have eyes all over themselves, as if to say they are God's awareness of all things. These 7 eyes, related to Jesus, would be his full awareness. And that's why in chapters 2 and 3, when he speaks to the churches, how can Jesus keep saying, I know, I see, because he's got 7 eyes. And he has eyes of fire in chapter 1, which means he sees how it really is. Like, all of these details of this vision are meant to give you a sense of confidence in Jesus. You're supposed to walk away thinking, there's no one like him. There's no one greater than he is. I don't have to fear men like Caesar. I don't have to fear the people throwing me off my property. I don't have to fear, because as much power as they exercise in this moment, they don't have total power and they don't see everything. They don't know everything. But I love the one who does, and he loves me. Ooh, it's great. So, as we keep walking through this picture, and we just have a little bit of time left, so we'll see how far we can get into verse 7 here. This lamb, you know what I skipped? I skipped a really important detail. Let's go back to the beginning of verse 6. I forgot this one detail about the lamb. He said, I saw a lamb looking like he'd been slain, standing in the middle of everybody. What do you suppose he saw about the lamb that made the lamb look like it had been slain? He doesn't tell us, so we get to just...
Blood.
What is it?
Blood.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder.
The first thing I think of when I think of something slain, it's lying down.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You're dead.
Standing there. So I'd be like, that thing ain't dead. It might be injured, but it ain't dead.
Yeah.
It's to be standing there.
This is unsettling. It looks as if it's been slain. It appears that way, but obviously it isn't slain, because here he stands. Now, if you would remember with me that when Jesus was raised from death, he had an immortal, resurrected body. It wasn't like the old one he left that was put into the tomb. It was transformed to be it's still a human body, but an immortal, eternal body, right? And the one thing that we know of for sure that was left over from his old body, unnecessarily, by the way, it didn't have to be this way. Do you remember that when he showed himself to his apostles, specifically Thomas, who would not believe until he saw and felt, what did he say? Touch it. And he even lifts up so he can put your finger in there. If that's what you need, Thomas. Now, what I really love is that Thomas, as far as we know, didn't do it. He's like, no, you got me. Sorry, you called my bluff. I believe. Seeing you and hearing you is enough for me, my Lord and my God. So, is it possible that this is a reference to the fact Jesus still bears the signs of his being slain?
I often wondered that when we meet him face to face,
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to see that.
And I don't know how this will go. I like to picture a big hug, but I also picture myself going,
But when I get up,
Yeah, however it goes, the scars are either here or here. It's hard to hide that, Now, I do notice in chapter 1, John didn't describe that on the person he saw. But in this vision, he looks like he's been slain. There's evidence he was killed by somebody. But he's standing here, and he doesn't, from what we read, he doesn't look like he's weak, or he's like leaning on the throne. Sorry, give me a second. Like he's fully in control here. Keep that in mind, because the idea of his having been slain comes up again. I'm not sure why I skipped that, but I did, so here we go. Now look at verse 7. I think we're going to end here, given our time. He went and took the scroll from the right side or the right hand. It can be either way translated. From the right hand of him who sat on the throne. Now that seems like a quick, let's move on. But remember, this is the fulfillment of what John had been hoping for when he was weeping. He wasn't just weeping because he hadn't seen the lamb with 7 horns and eyes before. He was weeping because no one could take the scroll. And here, maybe the elder was wrong. Maybe the elder thought that this Lion of Judah, the root of David, maybe he thought he was worthy, but maybe the elder got it wrong. And he sees the lamb and he goes to take the scroll, and the one on the throne says, nope. So don't just zoom on past this because we already know he takes the scroll. No.
It says he came and took the scroll. That's bold.
Yes. You
Here's
got it.
this throne of God, and you're just like, I'm going to take this from it.
Now, we don't know that everything happened as described here, but certainly he doesn't give any indication. He bows and asks permission. May I have the scroll? You're exactly right. He took hold of it. Now, that indicates a confidence that he is worthy. Even if I was counted worthy by somebody, I would probably just not go up and do that. I'd be like, could you maybe hand it to me? Just verify. So he clearly has confidence that the one on the throne is going to allow this. He agrees that he's the worthy one. And of course, it's the Father who declared him in charge of everything. So now remember, I don't know that we're watching like a rewind and playback of what actually happened when Jesus returned to heaven. We're watching a symbolic enactment of it, right? So obviously, we don't want to read too much into this. Oh, so that's what happened when Jesus got back to heaven. What we're seeing is what the early church and the current church of persecution needs to see about Jesus. That he is not just said to be worthy. If he reaches out and takes it, what? He is. The one on the throne. See, remember, the one on the throne didn't tell John that someone's worthy. An elder did. Which, that's pretty impressive. But the elders bow down before the one on the throne. There's someone greater, and the reaching out to take it is the confirmation that the greater one agrees. He's worthy. And when he had taken it, verse 8, listen to the reaction. And this is where I think the guy who was walking me through took the scroll of the law and all that, he made a point that I had missed, and I'm grateful to him for that. When I described before that Joash was crowned, do you remember that? By Jehoiada? I don't remember what the high priest's name was. But when he was coronated, there were 3 steps to it. He was crowned, given the scroll of the law, and then anointed. And he pointed out several times as he was going through this, they were quiet until. Once all of that was done, then they clapped their hands, they shouted, and they said, "Long live the king!" Everything had to happen before you get excited. Just like, I mean, in inauguration, they're not president yet, or whatever it is, So when the Super Bowl happens, you won the game, but you're not champs yet. Let's get the trophy out here, that kind of thing. And the ceremony, isn't that funny? The ceremony of that trophy, everyone's kissing it. Can you imagine coming from a distant planet, watching that ceremony happen? Look at the little god they have. But I mean, the point is, you can understand that someone is going to have that, but until it's actually done, there's something missing. So now that he's taken the scroll, now the beings around the throne are going to react. What's their reaction? When he had taken it, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down. Before whom?
The Lamb.
Now, if you go back to chapter 4, the 4 living creatures aren't said to have fallen down. They worship, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Now, in reaction to their worship, the 24 elders fall down before the one on the throne. You fast forward to this stage of the thing here in chapter 5, all 28 of these persons are bowing down now, but it's the Lamb, right? Oh, is there any doubt what's being said about the Lamb right here? Because if before 24 of them were bound down before the one on the throne, now 28 of them bound down before the Lamb. Can we honestly think that the Lamb is this? And the reason I bring this up is because some cults and other groups, they'll claim that Jesus is very important, but he is not divine. He is like the Archangel Michael. He's an exalted created being. Gag! How do you go through this and think to yourself, what other created being are any of these things bowing down before? Now, this would make sense if the 4 living creatures said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And the 24 elders are like, "Wow, you guys chant really awesome." And the 24 bowed down to the 4 living creatures. That's not how this goes. You bow down in the heavenly court scene, you bow down before the royal ones, the divine ones. So the fact that they're doing that to the Lamb is exceptionally important. And if anyone tries to talk you out of the truth that Jesus is the divine one, Revelation is actually probably one of your best places to go. Now, what does it say about these 28, the 4 creatures, the 24 elders? We know they laid down before the Lamb, but each one has a harp. Isn't that interesting? Even the 4 living creatures have harps. And they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of... I don't like the way the NIV went this run. In the older NIV, it said the prayers of the saints, which still probably isn't best because we have misconceptions of that. But it was closer. The word here, just so you know, maybe you can mark it in your Bible. If you have the words God's people, I mean, it's accurate, but it's inferior because the actual word used by John means holy ones. And you're like, well, aren't the holy ones God's people? Well, yeah, but this says something about us. Who we're supposed to be. How we're supposed to live. How we're supposed to think. This just tells us who we belong to, which is amazing. Like, I'm not downplaying that. But that, I'm like, why did you say that? I think there are other places it translates that God's holy people. I'm like, okay, at least you got me there. Or at least you used the word holy. But just so you know, we're talking about the holy ones, the saints. And that, to me, maybe I'm being picky. But that's important to me. Okay. Now, briefly, with the few minutes we have left, let's talk about the harp. Why does this come up here? This is one of the most enduring pictures of heaven that we've got in pop culture. I see all these political cartoons where someone's at the pearly gates and then they make some joke about somebody. And there's usually a harp. There's like somebody's got a harp whenever there's a heavenly picture scene. Well, that's understandable because in heaven there's people with harps. And there actually comes up throughout the Revelation. We're going to see this a couple times. Where is it? Yeah. 5/8, 14/2, 15/2, 18/22. Like the sound of harps or harps, they're a thing. I just want you to know, I think the best connection here is that the Levites of the Old Testament, some of them were set aside by David the king to be musicians. There's going to be a musical wing of the Levites, and they're going to play the songs for Israel in the worship time. And so harps and lyres and other instruments were being used. And we're going to see as we go a lot of connections between heavenly scenes and the priesthood. We've already seen it with the white clothes, and the 24 divisions maybe explains the 24 elders and all that. Well, here the harps, that's the instrument used in the worship of God on earth. And we know that a lot of things that happen on earth are actually copies of things that actually go on in heaven. Maybe. So maybe this is just a picture. Maybe this actually happens in heaven. We don't know. But please don't think of the big harp. Like, oh my gosh. Hey, Bill. Have you seen the little ones that are personal size and you just, like David would have? Yeah. So they each have a harp. Clearly there's music. So that one makes sense because they're about to sing a song. So okay, there's harps. They're going to play while they sing. That's lovely. But what's this other thing that they're holding? Each one of them had a golden bowl. Now, golden bowls were used in Old Testament worship as well, and the bowls would be used for the drink offerings and things like that. Sometimes they'd be used for the incense. But the bowl of incense here represents what? What does the incense represent?
Prayers.
Okay, I want to rewind when we pick this up next time to look at incense throughout the scriptures, just so we understand how significant this is. But let's end our time tonight thinking on this. What in the world do the prayers of the saints on earth have to do with the worship of these beings before the Lamb? Why is that entering into the vision? Like, they're bowing down, they're about to sing, so they have harps, all that makes perfect sense. What is with bowls of incense? Why does that enter in? Again.
Repeat it again. What do the prayers?
Yeah, why does the incense, which represents the prayers of the holy ones on earth, why does that enter into this scene?
It said it was a normal feature of Hebrew rituals.
That's true. In fact, that's what we're going to rewind and look at next time, is what was incense all about in worshiping God in the Old Testament. But my thought is, it comes up later in a place that makes perfect sense for it to come up. But here, why here when they're about to worship the Lamb for being the triumphant one? Why incense?
It's a way of bringing the people into...
Yeah. All right. Because up until now, we've had heavenly beings, right? Now, even if they're human, even if these 24 elders are human, they're like humans representing heaven and glory. I personally think that this is the way of showing that the prayers of the holy ones of God, from the Old to the New Testaments, awaiting the coronation of a king who could be good and would do it God's way and would bring justice and would, all the things that human rulers have failed to do since we started this whole mess, that people looking forward to Messiah. And then the disciples of Jesus who knew he had come, but were still waiting for the big payoff, when the new creation hits and all these awful earthly rulers are put in their place. That all these prayers, the way I envision it, is that what these creatures are showing is that all these prayers are being fulfilled. It's the payoff. And I want to tell you why that matters to me. That's why I wanted to end with this. And again, I'll go back to yesterday's thing about the abortion bill and so many things that are going on in the world that I'm just, I'm so sick in my heart. Not mad. I get mad. But it's not even that. It's just sickened by what I'm seeing in the world around me. That has been the story for holy ones throughout the human story. Enoch, I'm sure, grieved by the evil around him. Noah was a preacher of righteousness. He was grieved. Even Lot, who moved into a wicked city knowing it was wicked, he was grieved, Peter says, in his spirit by the wickedness. I want you to know that when we grieve over the evil in our world, that's not the point. what should that grief turn into? The prayer. The prayers of the holy ones. And we're going to see this a lot when we get there next week, but this is the incense of the Old Testament, the smoke, the cloud that rises to the nostrils of God. These are the prayers of his people, and this vision to me says those prayers were worth it. It took millennia for some of those prayers to even show that they made any difference at all. It took forever, but I think these creatures are showing, but it did. It finally did. These prayers mattered. They were worth offering. And so for you and for me, when we throw up these prayers about the state of things in our world or our families or our workplace, and it just seems like nothing's happening, like what is the point of praying about it? Remember this scene. Because it may take centuries or millennia, but God is not ignoring them until finally he's like, all right, I guess I'll do it. Like he hears them, he's storing them up, they're represented in the scene, they're represented. When the king finally takes his place, it's almost like what you just said. It's God's nod to all these human faithful ones who prayed even when it seemed like it didn't matter. It's like it mattered. Watch it. We're going to see this come up again in chapter 6, so hold on to that thought. But it matters. Keep praying. Endure in prayer. Don't give up in prayer, because the incense rises. It does. It's a sweet aroma in the nostrils of your God. And he's taking note. He will do it.